All know me. My name is Mark Harsley. I'm the program director here at the Be Nimble Foundation. I am excited today to have our speaker for our tech talk this afternoon, Mr. Block. I am extremely happy that we have been able to coordinate this. And I know he has a pretty busy schedule and a lot of different things going on, some new changes, but we're excited to have him join our community. So I would ask you guys give him your undivided attention, prepare to have questions. I believe he has some things prepared to start, but we are going to make sure that we leave time for some question and answer. I will definitely jump in there as well if there aren't a lot of questions to kind of like spur the conversation and keep it going. But without any further ado, I will hand it over to our speaker.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. I'm happy to be here. I appreciate y'all inviting me in, creating the space. I much rather prefer a more interactive conversation here. I always hate talking at a lot of people, so I'll go ahead and just start with just a little bit of introduction about myself and career path and everything. So again, my name is Keawe Block. My current role here, I head all of our recruiting efforts, specifically focused on diversity here at Google. We support hiring across technical and non-technical roles. As far as a little bit of background, graduated from UCLA with a history degree, and only got that because I was an athlete and I wanted to graduate on time. So if anyone else is a former athlete, you understand what that's like. Had no plans or no ideas what I wanted to do after college because I thought I was eventually going to try to go pro. But as we know, 99% of the time that doesn't happen. So I ended up having to figure out something to do. Got into sales. I joined a management training program at Enterprise Rent-A-Car. It was there for a couple of years. Again, going through the management program, understanding how to manage, understanding how to run a business. And then I ended up making a big career change and jumped on into tech. And I'd say jumped with the assistance of a really good friend who was also at Google at the time. Continued to talk to me about recruiting, and my understanding of tech back when I started in 2012 was I just knew that you could Google something. I had no idea what it actually meant. I didn't understand what the recruiting organization was like. I didn't understand the tech scene whatsoever. But I was blessed with the opportunity to be able to start with an entry-level position as a recruiting coordinator. And then I worked my way into a technical sourcer, and then onto leading the team and heading the organization that I'm in now. So again, we focus on hiring all underrepresented groups across a multitude of roles. And outside of that, I'm happily married. I got 3 beautiful baby boys I'm trying to raise from boys to men. Shout out Motown. And that's where we're at.
Oh,
So, yeah.
Appreciate that introduction. Well, I know when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, I know there were a few things that we wanted to talk about, and kind of building off of that experience, just to kind of give you our community kind of background. Ultimately, everyone here, part of our community, we almost have a community of almost 200 people now who are all transitioning careers into tech, who all span the spectrum from back-end development, Python, data analytics, digital marketing, UI, UX. So we have, those who do have 4-year degrees. We have those who don't have 4-year degrees. We have those who have advanced degrees. What can you say specifically from your experience? What could you share as a tip for someone who made that jump like you? How did you get acclimated? Obviously, you had someone there that was able to kind of like assist you with that process of getting to Google. But what were some of the other things that were important as you were making that transition from athlete to now working for one of the largest companies in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and this would be applicable to whether it's a technical role or non-technical role. I think when I transitioned over, obviously I didn't have prior recruiting experience or didn't have any experience within tech. But the way that I had applied my skill set and everything, and this stays true today, is understand what the minimum qualifications for the role were. And for the role that I was getting into, I was able to apply sales background, sales expertise. I was able to apply um, or give a lot of working examples of a lot of attention to detail, because in the recruiting coordinator role, it's obviously a lot of coordination. It's a lot of very high level attention to detail. And as I prepared for that interview and went into it, the way that I had pivoted and positioned my resume was to make sure that it read, that it highlighted the skills that this specific role was looking for. So I think naturally what we find, a lot of people will create one general resume, like say, here's my resume, right? But what I did with that, and what I've obviously learned in being in this space now, is that you want to tailor your resume and your experience to the actual role. So pivoting over again, without any previous tech experience, I honed in specifically on what were the minimum things that this role was looking for as far as skill sets. And then I also looked at what were the preferred qualifications. So generally, when you look at a lot of different roles across tech, you'll see something that will have, here's the bare minimum qualifications that we need. And then here are some nice to haves, or what we call preferred qualifications. And even if I didn't have those, I wanted to make sure that I can at least speak to it, right? You want to position yourself as, I have the skills that would be applicable to this role. So again, that would apply for whether it's a technical role or not. So if anyone that's looking into any type of career transition or role change or anything like that, like the biggest tip would be to make sure that you fully understand, what's the minimum needs for this role. And I think that's where I think anyone would have to have the self-awareness of, okay, if I don't have the minimum qualifications, what are some things that I can do to go and build that and make sure that I can build up the resume that would speak to it? Because the recruiting process, the interviewing process, everything, a lot of it is just, how can you prove that you have the experience to do this role? Once you actually get into the role, obviously you're going to have a lot more at your disposal as far as trainings and learnings and things like that. And you can evolve into it. A lot of it is just, how do you prepare for that actual interview? And again, that's by understanding what are the actual needs for the role, what's the baseline expectations for this company, what's some history of the company, where have they gone, what are some future things, and being able to apply your expertise to things like that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So as you have grown in your career, obviously you started there, and now you're doing a really, really important role as far as overseeing the hiring for, and we have a very diverse. What are some of the challenges you've seen for those who are from, a diverse background? Maybe what are some of the things you've worked on to be able to address some of those potential shortcomings that are part of it? I know we've had a previous conversation in the past, and you said something that really, stuck out to me, and it was essentially that one of the things that we have to do is be able to prepare people for the challenges of over the humps and the barriers that exist while trying to build programming and other opportunities to create those, pathways. It really takes both. So it really could kind of expand or talk a little bit more about those things. I think that would be really helpful and relevant as well.
Yeah. I might go off on a little bit of tangent here, so reel me back in if I need. But I think what we got to understand is, like Google and a lot of these other companies, we're a microcosm of the world, right? So in knowing that, I think it would be naive to assume that any company is going to have the perfect 100% equitable hiring process and growth process and everything like that. So I think as we understand that, I think that's what led to that response that you highlighted there, of like, a lot of what we're focusing on in the recruiting space is, as experts in the recruiting space and experts at Google, I know exactly what the recruiting process looks like. So in doing so, what my organization and what we train the rest of recruiting to do is, how do you advocate and coach your candidate up to be able to be effectively prepared for this interview process? And when we're talking about getting over the humps, it's a lot of being able to understand what bias could happen within that process. Now, while we're doing that, and we can do that very well, we can hire more representatively, we can build a more representative workforce. The other things that we need to continue to work on is obviously representation it's a huge wheel, right? It's not just hiring, right? There's so much more that needs to go into how you build culture, how you retain talent and everything like that. And that's a lot of the things that we'll need to be able to create and gather enough data to be able to drive this narrative. So again, for someone that we're talking about helping get over the hump, one of the examples that we always talk about for anyone that's into, again, like software engineering and coding, you know that, you know, in your general day-to-day when you're coding, you can reference different library functions and things like that, right? You can test code and do all that. But in the Google interview process, you have to do everything from scratch, right? Like you're not able to reference anything. So you need to be able to talk through all of that. And that's one of those examples of, if we have someone who's phenomenal at coding, but in their day-to-day and their comfort level, right, this is what they look like in the comfort of their home or their space, this is how they code, and this is what they reference. It is then up to the recruiter to be able to coach and say, hey, this is actually what the interview process is going to look like, and these are the things that they're going to test you on. So that's the stuff that we're talking about. Like, that's that hump that we need to get over, because you coding from scratch, that doesn't necessarily prove or show that you're going to be effective at the job once you get in, right? Because once you come into Google, you'll have all of that at your disposal. You'll be able to test your code and reference all these different libraries and things like that, right? So the actual interview process is going to differ than what the day-to-day role is. And that's one of those examples I was alluding to. We're talking about how do we get people over the hump there, because a lot of times, and you know, over the years, what we've gathered is that if a recruiter isn't going to proactively talk a candidate through that, how do we expect a candidate to know that's what they're going through, right? So a lot of what we focus on over the years is that, you know, as we put candidates through process, as we gather more data and understand where are their shortcomings, where are their successes, we need to make sure that we're building equitable processes that will scale, right? So that we can overcome this, right? So that we can move that. So over the years, our recruiting and hiring process has evolved a lot. A lot of it is purely just based on the data that we've seen, right? So if we have an anecdote about something that we think is happening, we'll need to spend some time focusing on it and saying, okay, I'm seeing why this is a drop-off, right? So for example, when our team was first created back in 2012, our thought process at the time when we're focusing on diversity was that, oh, this is a pipeline issue, right? There's not enough underrepresented pipeline out there to fill this. So a lot of our behaviors at the time were, how do we just identify as many candidates as possible? All that we need to do is put them into the process, right? It took us a couple of months to realize, after we started looking through interview feedback and trends, was that there's actually more than enough pipeline. The issue was our interview process. So we shifted our whole focus to knowing that there's these gaps in the hiring process, right? How do we drive the narrative to make sure that these can become more equitable? So over the years, again, we've evolved a lot with the way that we change processes, with the way that we're evaluating talent, with different checks and balances, with different programs that we offer and things like that. And it's going to be a journey. And I think I'm one to say, I don't know if we'll ever get it 100% solved, but as long as we're continuing to make progress in that space and driving more equity throughout everything that we can do, hopefully we're creating a space to where, again, folks, regardless of background, will be able to have success, right? And one of those things that I highlight, you know, you talked about, there's some folks in here that will have degrees, some folks that don't have degrees and things like that. A couple of years ago, we continued to push the narrative that, hey, we need to look outside of schools like Stanford and MIT if we're looking specifically for software engineers, right? There's so much more talent out there with these different backgrounds and career changers and things like that. But we didn't have enough data to prove it, right? So as we started focusing on how do we coach someone up, right? So for example, someone in a computer science program at Stanford, they're going to take a class that teaches you how to interview in tech, right? Whereas someone from a school outside of that won't have that same opportunity. So that's the place that we'll close the gap. As a recruiter, that should be up to us to say, okay, here's exactly what they're looking for in the interview process. And this is what it's going to look like. This is what you're going to go through. So make sure that you're spending time preparing on X, Y, and Z. So again, while we're working through a lot of these things to make sure that we can get as close to 100% equitable as possible, we'll try to close those gaps by different offerings as well. No, that was a bit of a tangent, and we went around a lot of places, but hopefully that the culmination.
No, it was perfect. Ultimately, I think that we need to understand the full picture. I also feel that ultimately, again, the best way to prepare the pipeline is, again, for the reality of it. One of the things that we really do hone in on is that, like, we're not trying to create this fairy tale narrative for those who are a part of this program. We understand that it takes work. We understand that it takes commitment, and it's our job to show up to be able to meet those challenges as a community and better prepare, in those communities for those realities, because I think there are times when we could potentially do each other a disservice when we put people into positions without really giving them the real about what is really happening. And that's ultimately the reason why we've created, community around our training and certifications who actually do come through Google. And I think that there's a lot of that's been suggested as a part of the Global Google Scholarship Program to continue to build, all those things you're talking about. So I just wonder if anybody has some questions based on some of the things that we've talked already. I'll have some more questions of my own, but I want to get you guys involved. So just raise your hand really quickly and then unmute yourself. Mercedes?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, I'm Mercedes, and my question is, I'm sorry, how do you pronounce your name?
Keawe. The W sounds like a V.
Keawe. Okay, I don't want to mispronounce your name. When you said that you had someone on the inside at Google, do you feel as though had you not had that person to kind of coach you and provide some insight into the company, that you would have had a good chance of getting the entry level position that you had? Granted, we don't know if that was, the case, because you did get the position, but a lot of people say it's who you know, not what you know. So I guess my question is, would you attribute that to your success with getting into Google? Or do you feel like because of your previous experience, you had a pretty good chance of getting the position regardless of knowing that person on the inside?
That's a great question. I'd say in 2012, absolutely. I would 100% attribute it to that. Now, I would say that wouldn't be necessary.
Okay.
Right? Because those are some of the things that we've identified, right? Where back at that time, the referral pipeline. So when we're looking at different pipelines, right, there's a lot of different channels of how candidates get involved into the process. One of them is applying online. One of them is being passively sourced, right? So you're a cold lead and someone on the inside reaches out to you because of your skill set. But our largest contributor to hiring was referrals. So at that point in time, I would say absolutely. But now let's figure out like what the issues are within that, right? A majority of Google, right, are white, Asian demographics, right? Now, for majority of that is that what are the referrals likely going to look like, right? So a couple of years ago, as we started to look at our pipelines and what the representation of each pipeline was, we identified clearly that while the referral channel yielded our highest number of hires, it also drastically negatively impacted what our representation would look like. So we've done a lot of work to really break a lot of that up, figure out other ways that we can get better representation within the referral pipeline and things like that. So again, very long-winded, but to answer, back in 2012, I would absolutely attribute it. If I was to look at that now, I don't think that would be the case, because I think of how tech has evolved. And again, we're far from perfect, but I know that there are a lot of programs in place that we do at Google. I'm also very familiar with a lot of other companies that have very intentional processes in place to ensure that someone could cold apply to this role and have a chance to be looked at. And there's also processes where, this is what Google will do too, if you apply to a role online and you're rejected for whatever reason, you're within the database, and we have recruiters and sourcers that 100% focus on passive pipeline, and all of their day-to-day is combing through that database, right? They're putting in keywords like, I actually have this different role and I'm trying to find this skill set. So there's a really good chance that a candidate that applied online could be rejected there and hired through another avenue there as well. So Very long-winded, but hopefully that answered it for you.
It did. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? You can go ahead. Thank Nicole.
I had a question in relation to the keywords and such. Do you is the search gonna come through on cover letter and resume for keywords? I know I recently applied to a position and I kind of made sure I was hitting keywords in my resume, and I didn't do that as diligently in my cover letter. So I was just kind of wondering if, and it could be different for different organizations, but I was just wondering.
Yeah, so for Google, it would be specific to resume. So when you have a cover letter, we'll have an algorithm that would parse that out, right? And if we're searching specifically for something in a cover letter, a recruiter will be able to differentiate that. Again, I don't know how other companies will operate, but yes, for Google will. I would also recommend that unless a role requires a cover letter, I wouldn't recommend one.
Interesting. Why do you say that?
Because a lot of it, because of how like when passive folks look at things, or when I'm saying passive, when recruiters look at passive candidates, 99% of the time, the first thing they're going to is the resume, because that's what the hiring manager is looking for, right? And as a client manager, I want to provide exactly what the hiring manager is looking for, and especially for the roles that I've been very familiar and hands-on with, none of those hiring managers are required or requested cover letters. I do know that, especially on the non-tech side, there are some roles that do prefer it. So that's why I said I would be diligent to make sure whenever you're applying to a role, if it requires one, I think they would call it out.
Awesome. Good insight.
Thank you.
Anybody else with some questions? I know that I had one question. If you guys have questions after this, again, just go ahead and use the raise your hand function. That way we can see it and get to it. But since this program here is, an alternative, education program. Obviously, it isn't being run through a university. We have, scholarships that we provide through the Grow with Google partnership. But there's a term in the industry, boot camp bias, when it comes to those who did not. And I know you already spoke about that a company like Google over the years has evolved to consider more candidates outside of the traditional, pipelines that lead to making the same types of hires. We've heard in the industry for a couple of years now that with the growth of boot camps, we wouldn't technically consider this program to be a boot camp because we provide a lot more flexibility for our learners so they can have an opportunity to access it. But what are some things you might face coming from a background like that to be prepared for? And I know a big part of it is that being prepared for the interview process. And you kind of related it to in the past, I believe, like the combine, like the difference between preparing for the combine when you are focusing on much more micro things. You may run the 40, you may do, bench press 225, those things may not be completely, they have some relevance to the role once you get on the field. But that's one of the things that, a lot of companies, including Google, may be looking at. So it's kind of like, I know I kind of maybe jumbled the question up a little bit, but ultimately, just want to get some tips for this audience who is considering and has already invested in this, training. What are some other things that could be prepared for that you've seen? Because I know that there are those within the Google network who have gone through boot camp. So what are some of the things that you've seen that really made those candidates stand out, that got them through the process?
I'd say there's been a big evolution of boot camps and the success of candidates that have come from boot camps in yielding offers from Google. So much so that there's an entire, so we have different employee resource groups at Google. And right now there's works to creating one specifically for folks that have been hired from boot camps. So there's a whole effort on community building for folks that have been hired from. So whenever you have anything that's going to focus on community building, you know that there's going to be a substantial focus of inclusion in that space. So from just a pure, Googler standpoint, like there's a large community there already. Now, if we're thinking of the actual hiring process, if we're looking a couple of years ago, I would say it was a lot more difficult, right? It'd be difficult because a lot of this work that I've been, alluding to, talking about things that we've done over the last couple of years is how do we get our hiring managers and decision makers to evolve their thought process, right? Because on the recruiting side, it's easy for us to identify, here's a great candidate, but at the end of the day, we need this hiring manager to say yes. So a lot of our focus over the years have been, how do we continue to educate hiring managers to do bias busting, right? To understand that these, candidates with this background can yield the same, if not better, success than a candidate that's going to come from a Stanford or MIT or anything like that. And again, it's taken years to get there, but we're now at that point now to where, for example, a couple of years ago, a lot of these roles specifically required 4-year degrees, right? Like degrees are no longer a requirement whatsoever, right? So like that's a big win for us when we're trying to present talent to a hiring manager. So when we're the boot camp thing that you're talking about though, right? Referencing the combine thing, it touches on what I was highlighting a little bit earlier too. Regardless if you're coming from a boot camp, if you're coming from a computer science degree program, if you're coming from another role, at the end of the day, you got to understand that our largest competitor, one of our largest competitors, right, Amazon, who has software engineers there, we have candidates that have graduated from Stanford that are working at Amazon that have failed our interview process, right? So I think regardless, we need to understand that it's not going to matter what the actual background is. What's going to matter is, again, how you perform in the interview process. And that was the thing that I was referencing with the combine. So again, you touched on it a bit, but for those that aren't familiar with college football, once that season is done, athletes that are preparing for the NFL spend 2 to 3 months specifically preparing to get better at these different things that they'll be tested on. Again, running the 40 or lifting this. So all of their efforts are completely different to how they've prepared throughout the season, right? The different types of drills they're doing, the weights that they're lifting and things like that. They completely shift that for 2 months because they have to prepare for that test. And that test is the combine, right? Because they're being tested on how fast they run a 40, how many times they can lift 225. Once they're done with that, they go back to their regular routine. And it's the same process, right? As you're preparing for any types of interviewing, right? Okay, what are those minimum qualifications, right? For the combine, that's the 40, that's the 225 and things like that, right? So if you can understand what that bare minimum is, you'll be able to better prepare yourself for whatever that interview process is going to look like. So hopefully by understanding what those qualifications are and then understanding the information that a recruiter will give you on top of any additional information that you'll find for yourself in your research for a company, when you combine all that together, regardless if you're from a boot camp or you're from a competing company or you're from a top tier school like Stanford or something like that, at the end of the day, what's going to matter is how you prepare within the interview process. Because here at Google, once candidates get into the interview process, the feedback is what's going to determine the outcome, right? It's not gonna matter based on again what school it was or if it was a boot camp. It's how well you performed against the interview rubrics. So.
Oh, I really appreciate that. And I really like that the ERGs you guys are considering that.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that will be extremely helpful in specifically addressing some of those things. Really glad to hear that, as I know many, who doesn't want to work for a company, like Google. There are many of us who have always, seen that as a premier opportunity, and rightfully so. And so, again, we just want to continue to prepare and learn our community for the challenges ahead and what they're going to face. And it's your comments a couple of months ago where I'm actually trying to add to our program towards the end as those get to the 80% completion, where we are going to start preparing. I'm going to call it the combine, actually.
Yeah, I love it.
Combine, because ultimately, when you mentioned that in the past, it stuck with me. And I feel like that was one of the things that I was saying, like, what can we really do to really help people as they get to the end? And it's like, that analogy has been so helpful for me as a former athlete as well, just from understanding, okay, I can grasp that, I can get that. Miss Young, you had a question?
Yes, I had a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess I kind of have like a two-part question. So I haven't been out of college that long, so I don't have a whole lot of experience. And so I guess I struggle with, you mentioned before, the creating the resume for specific jobs. How exactly do you do that without having a whole lot of experience doing a lot of things? Like, I feel like right now my resume is kind of formatted to um, showcase more of my accomplishments because I don't, again, I don't have a whole lot of experience. So, how exactly, like, what is the best way to format your resume for a specific job? Like, are you talking about just including those like keywords from like the job description, or is it deeper than that?
Yeah, I'd say it'll be a culmination of a lot of different things. I think it's more so it's tailoring it towards what that role is, right? So if you are, let's say you're applying to a role in construction, right? If your experience isn't directly within construction, how can you apply your experience to anything in building, right? That might be a too basic of an example, but it's more so of just tailoring to what that thing is looking for, right? If it's sales, right, or if it's metrics driven, which a lot of roles within tech are very metric driven. So it's more so how do you talk about something that you were able to solve and what did it yield, right? So if I'm thinking of I'm applying to a sales role, right? I would want to tie any of my experience towards here was a quota that I needed to hit, and here's what I achieved in this amount of time, right? So in your case, where you're saying you don't have that much experience, I would just tailor the experience that you do have, right? But also understand for the roles that you're applying for, the bigger thing that you're going to want to align to, it's how do you identify those roles that, again, that you're meeting all of those minimum qualifications. I think that's the bigger thing. And again, tailoring it to the role, it's just more so you wouldn't want a resume that doesn't speak anything to the actual role that you're applying to.
Okay.
So hopefully that was kind of broad, but hopefully that gave a little bit more insight.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I do have another question. So, with everybody doing this and formatting their resume and preparing and putting their best foot forward, and everyone's trying to stand out, how do people actually stand out? Like, when you are coming across applications, like, what really makes a person stand out from a bunch of people that are trying to stand out?
Yeah, great question. I'd say for an organization recruiting that's looking at hundreds of resumes a day, I'd say the simpler the better. I think it's natural for us, and I even thought this too prior, that the longer my resume, the more I would stand out, and that's actually the opposite. I think that the general rule of thumb when we're looking at resumes is your resume, as far as length, every 10 years of experience should be 1 page. And that's the best way, I think, to put it. Now, when you're talking about specifically, now that's just a general optic. Now, what's on the resume, what's going to be important is 100% results, right? When folks are looking at resumes, whether it's a recruiter, whether it's a hiring manager, what they want to look at is what was your clear responsibility and what did you deliver against it, right? Or like, what did you achieve against that? Or what did you build from scratch, right? A lot of times it's a natural thing that folks will do where, if we are putting on a resume, maybe it's you've had one job in your experience, they want to put 25 bullets of things. Like, that's one of those things, like a lot of that it's fluff and it's unnecessary. So I think as succinct as you can get, because you got to think again, if a recruiter is looking at hundreds of resumes at a time, they want to see very clearly 1 or 2 bullets. What is your clear responsibilities in this role? What were your expectations and what did you deliver against it? When you're talking about what you delivered against anything that you want to highlight in metrics, it's the best snapshot that we can see that you're able to deliver against an expectation. That makes sense.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that was helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. I did think that was very helpful. Do we have any other questions? I have one if nobody immediately has one.
I do have a question, and I apologize if you hear my dog in the background.
It's all
Um,
good.
it's to piggyback off of the question, well, rather the answer that was just given about the resumes. So I've worked on like CRM systems and other payroll recruiting type systems. However, specifically, my question would be, would you say it is a good and or bad idea to, when highlighting the metrics or things like that, would it be okay to say, okay, these are my bullet points of my, main responsibilities, specifically if I'm focusing that towards a certain role, and to then also highlight maybe like an achievement or accomplishment there, like if I got some type of promotion or something like that
Absolutely.
in the resume. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you're building your resume, you want it to be, it's basically a snapshot of your, like, and this is generally known, but like it's a snapshot of your career. So you want to highlight growth. You want to highlight even gaps, right? So any achievements you absolutely can. Now, whether you decide to put them, directly under the company and responsibilities, or if you decide to bucket them together, like accomplishments, however you prefer, I would absolutely highlight promotions, and again, gaps, especially because for someone that again is looking at 100 resumes a day, if they see a gap, but there's no explanation, it's going to be very easy to disregard that one, right? But if I'm reading one where it's showing a promotion or something, that's showing that, hey, you're valued at that company, you understand how to operate at the next level, and again, you've grown there, right? And any type of growth mindset highlights that we can do would be beneficial for sure.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I have one more question.
Go ahead.
Being that like in this particular program, in this cohort, different people have different levels of education and experience. Would you say, or what would you say in regards to like someone who is getting this, like making a career change, and they don't maybe have a lot of longevity on their last row? Like, what would be a good way, because this is just things that I've encountered in my career, like why are you leaving this organization? Those questions that come up. Like, what would be a good way to really answer that, like in a solid way?
And the best thing is you don't ever want to bash the company that you're at or previous company, right? Whenever, especially if you're talking to a recruiter or hiring manager or something, I would always highlight growth opportunities, right? Like maybe it's specific, like if you are looking to just switch industries, like being very transparent there is always going to be your best bet. Because a lot of times hiring managers and recruiters can snuff that out if they feel like someone is bluffing an answer. So I think transparency is key. As long as you're doing it in a way that's going to be respectful to that previous company, we have that a lot, right? We've had someone that we've been talking to this candidate, and they ended up withdrawing from a hiring process because they accepted a role at another company. And a month later, they call us back and say, this actually isn't what I thought it was going to be. I was expecting this. Do you still have any other opportunities? Right. And then as a recruiter, it's our job to make sure that we're driving that narrative for them. So we've come to a point in time now, whereas, maybe like 10 years ago, it was frowned upon, right, to have multiple jobs over the last couple of years. Whereas you're seeing a lot of success with that now, where folks are taking more control of their career and they're gaining more experience. And I think the benefit that we now see from folks that have worked in multiple companies is that you have a wider array of experience in different companies and different roles and things like that. If you can pitch it in a way that each move is a growth opportunity, that's to your benefit even more. But again, I think the best way to say it is like the transparency is key, but also know that in the recruiting space, we're very aware that people could be jumping onto a job and knowing that it's going to be a short-term type thing. So you're having more awareness in the recruiting space now, more understanding in the hiring manager space as well. Now, again, that's not going to be perfect across the board, but generally that's the thought process.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Jesus.
Hello. I am transitioning into tech, and I think some or most of us are. Do you have any tips or advice on how to navigate, because in the news we see these tech companies are having massive layoffs, right?
Yep.
10, 5, 7, 15, 20,000, workers. Do you have any advice on how we can navigate that and stay ahead of the curve for us transitioning into tech?
Patience. We're in unprecedented times, right? Like there's no guidebook to anyone that is trying to navigate this, right? For example, I have family members who were impacted by the tech layoffs, right? Folks that were impacted back in November who are still struggling to find roles. And again, those are folks that were already in one of these larger tech companies. So I think understanding the reality that not only was it difficult for folks to get into the tech industry beforehand, but now you add on 100,000, 200,000 more people on top of that who have tech experience already. Just understanding this is a really, really tough time right now. I don't think there's a perfect answer to it, but just understand the reality that we're in, and patience is going to be your best bet. And understanding that, if this means that your path, gets offset and you have to pivot to something else for the time being, I think at the end of the day, you're going to know what's most crucial for yourself and your family and the decisions that you got to make. But again, I know that's probably not a direct answer that you were looking for, but just for the sake of context and understanding that, I know a lot of people who have a wealth of tech experience, and again, they're struggling to find things as well. So the uncertainty right now, it's happening across the board. So again, like I said, just understand the reality of where we're at. Hopefully that can help guide and understand that, realistically, this might take a little bit more time than normal.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course.
So I have, we're now getting into close to like the last 10 minutes that we have, unless, how much time do we schedule? Regardless, I wanted to get into specifically, so we've answered a lot of questions around what some tips are once you get in. Can you dig a little bit more into what career advancement has looked like for you as someone from underrepresented, group in tech? Just to give, one of the things I like to do, even in the early admissions interviews with students, is I'm always ask them, where they ultimately want to be. It's important that you get in the door, but also I think it's important that employers have established kind of like ways in which they are prepared to develop the talent that they have once they get in. I think a big part of the DEI equation, is not only creating the pipeline and getting them in, but what does career investment look like? Kind of from your own experience, what has that looked like from you? How have you stood out after you got into, your role, that entry-level role that really has led to you now heading, having your own team and doing all these other things? Because I'm sure there are some who, through patience and continued skill development, will want to be in a similar, position, down the road.
Yeah. So my career path. So I started again, entry-level role, but I started as a contractor. So I was hired, full time by an outside company and contracted in at Google. And when I got in, my first thought after like my first week, when I realized, I can have a beard and I can have short sleeve, my tattoos be out and everything like that, I was like, oh, this is somewhere I need to be. My whole focus shifted to how do I create a brand for myself to where they never want to let me go. right? Like, how do I build that for myself? So that was always the driver and the narrative. So after I started recruiting coordinator as a contractor, my first week, I was asking well, what are the requirements to get someone here to get converted into full time? And after I got that understanding, talked to a couple of folks, I was able to get converted into full time after about 5 months. And since that time, I've been promoted 6 times. And I think the wave that I've been on, right, and we're talking about like development for underrepresented groups and everything. I think I would love to be an example of that, right? I've had people that have created ways for me. I've also had people that have created adversity for me. But what that allowed me to do is understand how to navigate that, right? I think one of the benefits I've had in this space is that, I mean, across the tech industry, there are the smartest people in the world. But I feel like where I've benefited a lot is not a lot of them have street smarts, right? And I know that might seem very basic, but like, I understand how to survive, right? I understand how to navigate. I grew up very underprivileged, and so I think those experiences help guide me into like figure out how to be successful in this space. So as I've been able to get promoted, a lot of my focus every time I've gotten to that space has been, well, what's the level above me and what are those expectations, right? And what's their responsibilities? And then I would drive my natural day-to-day to make sure I was achieving that, so that when it did become time for performance evaluations and everything, a lot of times when we talk about promotions here at Google, it's focused on, have they shown the ability to perform at the next level, and what's the scope for them at that next level? So in any problem I was trying to solve and anything I was working towards, it's, okay, well, is this problem going to solve something more scalable, or is it something very minimal? And that would help guide me towards where I'm going to focus a lot of my energy on. So again, I've had the benefit to identify a niche as well, right? So when we think of the diversity space, when we jumped on and started this team, diversity wasn't talked about in the tech industry whatsoever, especially in the hiring space. So we had a couple of years to get rolling, and then once it started becoming more of a topic within the industry around 2016, 17, we had already laid the groundwork into having success, right? So I think that naturally elevated myself to be able to take advantage of, I actually have a lot of answers that, these recruiting leaders or these hiring managers are looking for, and that naturally put me in spaces to be able to, again, elevate my expertise. So.
No, I love that. I actually specifically, I just love how you have been able to turn. Again, I think that it's important when we bring people like you in to get honesty, and I appreciate that, because people trying to create different barriers for you may be a part of your development. And I think it's important for all of us to understand how we can equip ourselves to survive. There are some things about our experience, about our existence as people of color, as those from underrepresented, underprivileged backgrounds, that really can eventually become the very things that keep us in positions. Because again, there's that hustle, there's that grit, there's the determination to finish, there's the asking the questions and, seeking out. I think that I definitely mirror, that advice for anyone who's getting started, is that being inquisitive, asking questions, using your natural problem solving, skills to be able to create opportunities for yourself. That won't only continue to develop, those skill sets, but it will develop your professional mindset around how you may approach some of the different things. One other question I have is just like, what are you most proud of in the time you've had an opportunity? I think you said since 2012, when you kind of first started in this position, a lot of things has changed in tech. It sounds like you guys have made significant strides to be able to create programming specifically focused on hiring. What are you proudest of over that 10 plus years that you've been able to, be, a part of that continues to move the needle?
Yeah, I think the thing that'll keep me coming, because at the end of the day, while I absolutely love what I do, right? Like, I have a passion about this space. I would love to be able to just be a dad and be a husband, right? And have a living on that, right? So at the end of the day, it is still a job. When I think about like the stuff that will keep me coming in, is that somebody opened the door for me. You know what I mean? Like, again, my a friend that I was talking about, he put my resume in, right? And if that hadn't happened, I likely wouldn't be in the space that I'm at now. I wouldn't be able to create the life that I've created for my family that I wasn't able to have. So in doing that, a lot of my focus and energy has been, how do I do that for other people, right? Like, how do I open the doors for those folks? And one of the things that I was really, there's a lot of things, but when we talk about the ability to influence and apply our expertise and everything, my mom, right, doesn't have a college degree, worked the same job for 20 years, got one raise for her whole career, which was like 50 cents. And a lot of times she was overlooked because she didn't have a degree. When we were able to knock off that requirement at Google to say we don't need a degree, like, I felt like I was doing that due diligence of opening up the door for folks that don't have that, right? So it's things like that that'll be huge for me. And then the other part of it is, like, I can pour into my entire organization, folks that I've hired and that I'm developing, and putting them in leadership opportunities too, right? Like, my whole focus for them is, like, yes, we are the diversity recruiting organization. Like, how ideal would it be if we didn't exist, right? If there wasn't a need for us. So everything that we're working towards is, how do I instill a lot of this understanding and expertise to the folks that I have the ability to lead, so that they can apply that in everything else they're doing, right? And if we think about it like that, it'll be a domino effect of impact. I think that's the biggest thing that will keep me going, because I'll have people that'll come to me and they'll say, I helped change their life and things like that. But I'm also saying that same thing to my friend that helped open the door to me. It's like, man, you changed my life. You opened this door for me. Now I'm able to do this for my family, right? I've gotten my brother into tech. I've gotten my sister into tech, sister-in-law's best friend who, had no tech experience, things like that, just because someone was in here opening the door. So the thing I'll continue to anchor on is, like, we got to make sure that, again, each one teach one, right? Like, any opportunity I can make to open a door for somebody else, where I feel like I'm paying that forward.
Love that. Do we have any other final questions? We got about 3 minutes left. Or just anybody want to express their, gratitude or anything that they really just are taking from this. We'll go Mercedes and then Jesus.
I really appreciate your insight. That's, like, super inspiring and amazing. My question is, with there being a lot of layovers in tech, is Google currently hiring at the moment, or what does that look like?
Yeah, great question. So the thing is, like, we've never gone through layoffs like this before. We are still hiring. However, it's definitely not what we've done before, right? Whereas in years past, we would hire 20, 30,000 people a year. We'd hire, 1,000 people a week. Those numbers have drastically diminished. And the way that it's going on now, we're hiring for very priority roles based on what the priority products that are being pushed out right now. So it's at a very, very low scale, but we are still hiring, and we anticipate that likely going into next year, as we figure out what's happening with the economy and what products will continue to push out, that will likely increase. But we're also being cognizant of, like, it would be weird to do a big hiring push right now, knowing that we just had to lay off X number of people. So it's a weird dynamic, but yes, there are pockets where there's minimal hiring still.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then what is your, like, are you on LinkedIn or like?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Please feel free to find me there. I'll let me put it into the chat real quick. Please feel free to connect with me, reach out if there's any questions you have. I'm happy to, let me put this in here. I'm happy to connect anytime, be of service any way I can.
Thank you. We really appreciate that. Jesus, can you close us out?
I actually don't have a question. That was a mistake, but I just wanted to thank him for his time, and all of this was really informational.
My absolute pleasure. I know this, y'all don't have to be here. It's late on a Friday, so I appreciate y'all spending some time with me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I really do appreciate that. I really appreciate all of you guys for coming out, taking in the information. We're definitely going to be sharing this recording. Outside of this, I personally have been working with someone else to continue to get more volunteers, specifically from Google, in here to help specifically with that combine piece that we're talking about, preparing you guys for interviews. We think this would be important not only for opportunities with Google, but any other top tech company that's really looking to hire you all based on your skills. So look forward to following up this with some other panels and some other opportunities to introduce you guys to more people in the network. But again, I appreciate you guys for making time, spending your Friday with us. And I will see you guys next week, and make sure you guys continue to make progress in your curriculum. I'll be checking up with you guys on Monday to see how everything's going.
Appreciate y'all.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.